scroll up to see excessive income from passive investments. So let's recap the restrictions on a small business deduction. One, $500,000 a year, our company plus associated companies combined. Associated discussion coming up, I promise you. Secondly, large corporations, a company that's bigger than $10 million of total assets, up to 15, zero small business deduction by the time we get to 15. And government says, we get this whole thing that people are incorporating for tax reasons because they want this deferral, because the tax rates are so low, 9% Manitoba. We, the government, don't blame people for incorporating and using their corporation as a retirement fund. In other words, to invest 91 cent dollars rather than 50 cent if they had earned the income personally and paid 50% tax. Government says tax planning, not avoidance, not evasion, tax planning, we understand it. We would do it ourselves if we could. But we're going to put limits on it. And the limit is similar to this kind of deal. If the corporation makes more than $50,000 per year of so-called passive investment income, so interest, dividends, most types of capital gain, we'll take the $500,000 and we'll reduce it. And at the end of the first paragraph, the full $500,000 business limit is limited when the aggregate investment income reaches $150,000 in the previous taxation year. They use previous so that you can sort of plan your year going ahead. You say, oh, this is how it was last year, so now in the current year I have a better idea of how much small business deduction I will get. So it goes from 500 to 0. So this is investment income. And if my investment income is greater than $50,000 last year, corporate, then I start going from full 500 eligibility down to 0 by the time I get to 150,000. And this is annual income. It's not income like from day one. It's income per year. Nothing I need you to calculate. Just please be aware of the principle that this is another limit on the ability to use the awesome small business deduction. This one, by the way, is brand new. This only came into law, I think, in 2018, and it was based on the current government being concerned about the fantastic, actually, ability to defer income for long periods of time by building up retained earnings and then investing them. Government says, fine, we'll allow it, but we're just going to put some limits on it. Which honestly, I think is if they want to do something about it, I think limits is a good way to handle it, and I think they've got a good middle ground. They started out by trying to eliminate the ability to earn investment income in a corporation. That is by totally disallowing the small business deduction. I don't know if that was just an opening salvo, but in any case where they came down at the end is not unacceptable. Any questions on that? Points 1 through 3. I would like you to have some understanding of what's meant by passive income. So you can understand sort of investment income. So I talked about interest and dividends, that type of thing. Taxable capital gains, but they are excluded if they relate to gains on things that we actually used inside the business or whatever. I wouldn't call that a passive investment thing. I would call that, hey, those are assets we use in an active business, and we sold them, we just happen to have a capital gain. Those capital gains do not fit into this bad thing. Those capital gains are fine. Number 3 means, and you can actually write this in, dividends in the stock market. That's what's meant by dividends here. It's not dividends between my company and my father's company or something like that. It's a stock market dividend.
That's paid back to the corporation.
Received by the corporation.
That's
Yeah,
like-
received by the corporation. This is all income of the corporation that we're testing whether the corporation gets the small business deduction or not. So, in a question, just think about this graph and the fact that both for this passive investment income deal and also large corporations, we're quite fine as regards our $500,000 limit until a point, and then at some bigger point, our eligibility is completely eliminated.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do these two limit deductions apply concurrently? Like if you have, excuse me, if you have, like in the first one, if your taxable capital is at $13 million and your limit is only 200, does that mean that if you have more passive income that you have to reach, like are they additive or are they in parallel? Like if you have a 300,000 limit deduction on one and 300,000 on the other, does that just mean that your limit deduction is 300, or does it mean that it's completely eliminated altogether?
I will research that and get back to you. If I ever say I will research that and get back to you, you don't need to know it for the purpose of this course. But I like the question. It's an interesting one. Honestly, I haven't looked into it myself because this rule is so new. But I love doing research, and I will get back to you. Thank you. Any other questions? Associated corporations. Please turn to page 513. One of the biggest issues for which a lawyer is consulted is who should be the shareholders, what should the corporate structure be, et cetera, et cetera. Who should have voting shares, those types of issues. Lawyers are four squares within that class of questions. And they're really important questions, and those questions involve how the corporation gets set up in the first place, and often sort of how the corporation will operate for the rest of the corporation's life, which can be a very long time. So your client says, look, I would like to incorporate. I thought about the non-tax issues. I think those are good reasons. I thought about the tax reasons. Thank you for your help helping me understand what the small business deduction is all about and all the rest of it. I would like to set up a corporation to house a business. And in the usual way, the simplest idea then is that an individual, and henceforth individuals will be represented by circles and corporations will be represented by rectangles. So an individual owns all the shares of this corporation. Corporation does awesome. Corporation is, let's say, a retail business that has stores, starts off in Winnipeg, branches off into other cities, Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, and earns way more than $500,000 a year. Client comes back. Look, I would like to set up another corporation, and I'll make this one Winnipeg because it was the original and I want to keep it. But I want to set up this one for sort of rest of Canada. And as I understand it, I get 500 here, and I get 500 here, so like that's awesome. And the answer is, you would, except that the Income Tax Act has thought about this already. And this is the scenario on the bottom of page 513. If a corporation controls another, we say that they're associated and they have to share the 500,000. Full discretion, by the way. This company might take 200, this one might take 300, this one might take 0, this one might take 500. Totally up to the companies, but they have to decide, they have to share the 500,000 based on whatever decision they make. So one corporation controlling another. And it's only about controlling, like a corporation controlling another corporation. It's not the fact that this person is actually in control. It doesn't actually apply here. It's one corporation controlling another. Turn, please, in the Income Tax Act to 256(1). For the purpose of this act, sometimes preambles like this will say for the purpose of this part, and you recall part in this case is, in the case of section 125, which this relates to, that's in part 1. Here we're in part 17 for the first time. For the purpose of this act, not just this part, for the purpose of the whole damn act, one corporation is associated with another in a taxation year if at any time in the year one of the corporations controlled directly or indirectly in any manner whatever the other. So this one directly controls this one. If I don't put any numbers here less than 100, you can assume that this owns 100% of the shares of that. This owns 100% of the shares of that. So this corporation directly controls this corporation. Any questions so far?
I think you might have already mentioned it, but does that also include de jure control as well?
Yes, it is. In fact, we're specifically talking about de jure control here, which is voting shares eligible to vote for directors, et cetera, et cetera. We're specifically talking about de jure control here because we will later on talk about another type of control, de facto control, for which there's a second definition in the Income Tax Act. So we are talking about de jure control here. The diagram 1 at the bottom of page 513 points out that the control or the ownership need not be 100%. In this case, it's 60% and 60%. And in fact, there's a chain, there's a third corporation on this. So like you can go down the chain, whatever. Directly or indirectly means you can, the Income Tax Act can skip corporations and say that both of these are controlled by this thing, if you've got another corporation down here. Pretty powerful provision actually, which says that there's, at least in the case of this vertical structure, there's really no way to escape association if you've got control sort of happening anywhere here. And in a 60% or 100% scenario, we do. Turn the page. Yes?
Does the control percent, like for the percentage of control, does that have to be higher than a certain number, like over 50 or?
Over 50%, yep.
If not, like under 50, is it associated then?
About which we'll see some examples.
And just to further that, I assume this is correct, but if I've got like a corporation that owns 40% of another one, and I also control a different corporation that owns 40% of that same one, so like I control two corporations which control 80% of a different one, that's sufficient to link those, or is that?
Please hold on to that scenario. In fact, I'll just make myself a note like this to come back to it.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
Good. Say instead, well, if I can't have my way in a vertical structure, can't I have my way by doing this and have a horizontal structure? Because, Dan, you said that what's important in 256(1)A is control of one corporation by another. This corporation doesn't control this corporation or vice versa. But B says, for the purpose of this act, one corporation is associated with another in a taxation year if at any time of the year both of the corporations were controlled directly or indirectly in any manner, whatever, by the same, now we're talking persons or group of persons. Thus even more powerful because it doesn't require control by a corporation. Control by me is enough to associate these two companies. In diagram 2, it's less than 100% in one case, still associated, higher than 50. If it were only 50, if corporation B were only 50% owned by individual X, no association. So this association concept is getting to common control. So 150, no problem. Any questions so far?
So for our purposes, 50% ownership doesn't
Constitute control.
Doesn't constitute
Correct.
control.
Correct. Because it's not de jure control. But stay tuned for the de facto situation. You know, very interestingly, that the financial markets think that 20% is enough to control the company. And it often plays out that that's the case. The Income Tax Act says, look, hey, we're just interested in de jure control. We don't want to make this too restrictive. Back to B, we're controlled directly or indirectly by any manner, whatever, by the same person or a group of persons. Please gaze at diagram 3. So two individuals, related, not related, doesn't matter. I'm going to draw it a little bit differently. $50, $50, $50, $50. That's essentially the same diagram as diagram 3, but actually illustrates the fact that we have cross shareholdings. Any questions about the shareholdings? So it's two 50-50 scenarios. 50-50 doesn't indicate de jure control, except that we've got this group of persons piece in 256(1)B that says, essentially, we're going to consider this group as one person, essentially, and say that the group controls both corporations. With which, if you think about it for a second, if you think in legal or economic terms, this person only owns 50% of the whole shebang, and this person only owns 50% of the whole shebang. It feels to me like this isn't common control. It feels to me like a 50-50 situation. But because they're a group, and only because there's this cross ownership, the whole thing is considered to be under common control. So says 256(1)B. Yes?
So, and similarly, if I've got, 300 people, all of whom own 1/300,
Yeah.
two companies, the same thing applies, so it's just a large group that controls those two.
Yes, yes.
So like, does it not ever happen?
When do we
that
stop?
have like large investment firms that just happen to, coincidentally happen to own, like it just,
I bet you're right. Some of them might get blocked by the $10 to $15 million limit. But yeah, theoretically, if we had 300 cross ownerships, yeah, all of that would be counted here. Yes?
Does this section only apply to private corporations? How would they do that in a public environment?
Only applies to private corporations. How do we know that?
Those with small business deduction only applies to CCPCs.
Did you hear that?
But 256, okay, but we're just talking associated corporations, 256, right?
Correct. And I will guarantee you that associated corporations is defined only for the purpose of determining who gets a small business deduction.
Okay.
And small business deductions are only available to CCPCs.
Can you use different classes of ownership to sort of get around it, like no voting shares or something like that? Is that control, or how does that work?
Short answer, yes. Turn to 256 1.1. And we're not yet at C, D, and E, but just go to C for a second. And you see in C, the last line, other than a specified class of the capital stock thereof. A specified class is defined in 1.1 as shares that are essentially sort of like preferred shares that don't have a lot of the benefits of common growth equity shares. So yes, it is possible to, by having shareholdings of a different type, avoid this. But generally speaking, those are shares that people don't want to have. They are typically used for purposes like voting only and not growth in value, that type of thing, like preferred shares. So that's the answer to your question. It is possible to avoid this by changing the terms of the shares, but not in a way that somebody's actually going to want if they want to own this business. Please turn to 1.2. For the purpose of this subsection, a group of persons means any two or more persons, each of whom owns shares of the capital stock of the corporation. So that's what a group is. A group is anybody who's a shareholder. Now, watch this carefully. So this is like 50-50, 50-50, right? So essentially, this person owns 50% of the whole shebang, and this person owns 50% of the whole shebang. Now I want to change this such that this person owns 99% of this thing, and this person owns 99% of this thing. So this is 99, and this is 99. Pardon me, thank you. 1. This is 99, and this is 1. Still associated, I kid you not, because of 1.2 that says, well, a group is like anybody who's got shareholders. Take away either of these 1%, not associated. As soon as you got cross ownership, it doesn't have to be like 50-50 or even, whatever, 60. 99 and 1 will associate them if this group owns shares in both companies. Harsh, 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 yes.
So let's take the square on the left there. It has 99 shares issued to that person and 1 share issued to the other. How would that business know what else? Because the investments in company B, or the square on the right, they may not even know about that company, right? Because they're not, right, so where does the onus, and at what point does the corporation go, well, like, we didn't know that our shareholders were also investing in this other unrelated company? How would you know?
Well, this person presumably controls, or his lawyer controls, the share registry for this company,
Sure.
and would know if someone else had invested in it. In fact, the lawyer probably would have issued the share if the share exists on paper.
But the lawyer for the square on the left, yes. But those 2 shareholders could go out and buy shares in another company without informing the first one, right?
How would that look here? I'll draw it
Okay.
like a third corporation.
No, so it's just, so you have your 2 circles,
Yeah.
and they have 50-50 in the first one,
Yeah.
right? All is fine and dandy, great. Then they go out, have a few more beers, and decide that they're gonna buy into another company.
Correct. The 2 of them. Yeah.
The 2 of them.
Yeah.
But they don't let the lawyer of the first company know, because they're just shareholders. They're not required to inform the first company. So what happens when company B says, hey, now company 1 is getting screwed out of their small business deduction, and is there any onus on that company to find out what other companies might be associated, or is it just one of these, claim it and pray?
It's both, actually. The onus is on both companies to know with whom they are associated. And yeah, they might end up claiming and praying. And for me, the amazing part of this is that this company is actually controlled by this person. In which case, why are we even having this discussion? But because they're part of a group, so says 1.2, these things are associated. And you're right, it's completely possible that these companies would not know what the other one is doing following the second round of drinks. Crazy harsh rule. Big consequences in terms of, hey, I was hoping for that $30,000 per year. Yes?
If you have a group association like this and one of the companies is just a small $500,000 company and another is just unfortunately associated with a $15 million company through a setup like this, does that, you see where I'm going with this?
I do. So all of these rules about the 500,000 and also the 15 million and the 50,000, you bring all associated corporations into those tests. So yeah, if you've got 2 companies that are associated, not only do they share the 500,000, they also share the whole 10 million thing, and they share the $50,000 thing. Yes?
And is it a combined taxable capital thing? Like, could you just split the company into 2 if you have $15 million in
No.
taxable capital?
Because if the companies once split into 2 are associated, we have to add the taxable capital together.
Got it.
Yeah. Pretty powerful and actually well thought out schema of rules. I mean, this is actually pretty robust. Ways around it, way beyond the scope of this course. I'd have to spend a couple of days thinking about it, and there may not be any. So the planning, therefore, is honestly to make sure that we avoid the situation, if we can. I mean, there are scenarios where you can't. The company, honestly, the company's doing really well. You have to explain to your client that they might just have to pay tax. Here's a scenario, though. company's doing well, would like to have another corporation also do well. My spouse will own it, how's that? No association. So putting somebody I trust in this seat, whose economic interest is closer to mine than, say, my drinks partner, no association, not a bad result. Nice segue into number 3, related person control. No association here. Spouse 1, spouse 2, no problem. However, if you look at diagram 4, and I'm saying that individual Y is the spouse of X, not the son. 30%, 30, 70, and this is 100. These two are associated because 30 is more than 25 or more. As soon as this is 25, associated. Obviously 30, 40, 50. 24, not associated. Just a rule. Just a rule, they say, hey, we'll allow related persons to, and related means a spouse, or generally speaking, a blood relative. And that includes, you know, parents, children, sisters, brothers, not uncles or aunts, interestingly. We'll allow cross ownership or ownership by a relative up to 24.99999%. Just a rule, and we can have 24%, but not 25, 30, etc. Yes?
I was just gonna ask why 25 was the number that you got.
Arbitrary.
So that's 256(1)(c) and D, right?
All correct. So C, C is about a person, so exactly the diagram 4 and diagram 5. Diagram 5 just making the ownership indirect. So instead of individual X, spouse 1, owning the shares of this company directly, spouse 1 instead owns those shares via its interest in this company. And presumably C says indirect, does it? You betcha, directly or indirectly. So indirectly is this scenario. And D is about scenario 4, diagram 6, which is now I've got this person, and instead of one family member here, got the whole shebang, and a group of them if you look at Y and Z, who are related to X, and they own 60% in total. This non-related person, we'll say NR here, has 15, and this person has 25. 25, 85, and 15 is 100. And because B is a group that is, each member of which is related to, Y and Z are members of a group, yes, so says 1.2, like any two people, are both related to X. That's the same as if Corporation B were owned by X's spouse, which was the scenario that we went through in number 3. And because X owns at least 25% of both companies, now they are associated. this poor person over here, this related person, thought he or she was investing in a small business corporation that would get the small business deduction, and the answer is no. It would have been good if that person's lawyer asked questions like, well, who are the shareholders of both corporations? That would at least have given this person the more information about whether to buy into this company in the first place. Because this company has to share the 500, and who do you think is going to determine which company gets the 500? That person. So this person is left bereft of tax savings that would otherwise apply. Yes?
How does that person's lawyer know which corporations to look at in determining this? And I get you want to know who owns shares in this. So they find out that you've got little spouse one has 25%. But are they able to ask spouse one, tell us all your other shareholdings in all other corporations, and can they do that?
You could ask, they'd tell you.
Well,
like,
yeah, but I mean, like, spouse one doesn't have to tell you.
If you
right?
don't ask, you're negligent.
So you ask, and then they say, we're not going to tell you, and then you say, okay, good enough. Like, is that how that goes?
And I guess you've got cause to sue them if they haven't made full disclosure.
Oh, they have to make full disclosure of this.
Well, nothing says they have to, but I would sue their ass off if they did.
Ah, okay.
But the important thing is to know to ask the question. So if I'm buying shares in a public company, which doesn't enjoy the small business deduction, and I just know that I'm in there with a gazillion other people. But if I'm buying into a private company, I really need to know who I'm with. Probably for a lot of non-tax reasons, but for the tax reason that in this particular case, the company in which I've invested might be paying tax at too high a rate. Might be paying tax in Manitoba terms on the order of 27% versus 9%. And that's not what I signed up for. So my lawyer honestly has, I want my lawyer to ask those questions. Hopefully the lawyer will get the right answers from lawyer for S1, but not having asked the question is what you want to avoid. Yes?
In this example, we have Y and Z, the two family members,
Right.
each owning 30%. Does that 30%, like that's above the 25% threshold, but does it really matter? Could it be 10 family members each with 6% and still qualify?
That's correct. As long as
The group?
as long as this is more than 50, right? So the group controls the corporation. It could be 60 divided by 100 people, all related. They might not even know that they are related. As long as it's controlled by a related group, regardless how many shares each has, and the thing that associates them is this cross ownership by this person.
And that's where the 25% threshold.
Correct.
applies.
This 25 or 25 in general has nothing to do with these people's ownership, unless they also happen to own shares in this company. 25 relates only to the person who has shares in both companies. And again, I'll point out that this company is actually controlled by these people. I mean, this company is controlled by this person, and this company is controlled by these people. This person doesn't have, in fact, in this example, this person only has 25%, which is less than what each of these people has, which is 30. These rules are really harsh. They cause this sharing in cases where, honestly, if you looked at who's controlling things, I would say these two are controlling this company, and this person's controlling that company, but the whole thing for purposes of small business deduction is considered to be under common control. Yes?
Assuming that X isn't controlling the company with multiple, company B here, and they just own 25% of it for the purposes of dividends or whatever,
Yep.
they contract a non-related person to have a total of 40% shares and give him 25% back. but have it
So-
beneficial so that both companies can benefit from the SBE.
How would I change this to reflect that?
It would be like a line from S1 to non-related person, contract, via contract.
For a fee or something?
Yeah.
A fee, say, paid from this person to that person?
No, it's, well, yeah, it's true, but what about to non-related person, or an investor?
Come and see me at the break and I'll take you through that scenario. Thank you. Let us do take a break now and come back at 10 after 3.
Yeah. That sounds like extortion.
You are related to and who owns the other company, of course they need to be strict